They all thought he was a grieving husband, pacing hospital corridors in worry and pain. But if they had looked closely, they would have seen it, the flicker in his eyes, not sorrow, but something far more dangerous. Because for him, her coma wasn't a tragedy. It was the reward. I sat in the cold plastic chair beside her hospital bed, trying to make my breathing match hers, slow, shallow, mechanical. Wires ran from her temple. Tubes slithered into her arms. The heart monitor beeped like it was keeping time with a funeral march. "She's stable," the doctor said. "But there's been no sign of cognitive response for 3 weeks. Statistically, the chances of her waking up at this point are under 2%. I swallowed hard, let my lips part in fake devastation. "So, what does that mean, exactly?" The doctor looked at me with that practiced blend of sympathy and detachment that comes from delivering bad news too often. "It means you may want to consider preparing for long-term care, or letting her go." He patted my shoulder. The kind of touch people save for widowers. I nodded, eyes red, chin trembling. Everyone watching probably thought I was trying not to break down. They didn't know I was trying not to smile. I walked out of the ICU, past the nurse's station, and into the empty hallway. My footsteps echoed. My phone buzzed. I checked it. Tasha Kissmark, well? Me, better than expected. They think she's gone, basically. Tasha Kissmark, my God. It's happening, isn't it? What now? Me, now? We wait a little longer. Then the house, the business, the horses, it's all ours. My wife, Isabel, had built a life out of elegance and chaos. She owned a chain of boutique equestrian centers, loved her animals more than people, and refused to slow down, even after the fall. The surgery was supposed to help her walk again. Instead, it put her in a coma. But to me, it wasn't the accident that broke us. It was years before that, her stubborn independence, her refusal to sell the business when the market turned, the way she dismissed my big picture, thinking like I was a child playing CEO. She'd never let go of anything. Until now. I sat by her bed that night, when the nurses had all gone, and whispered, "Don't worry, Izzy. I'll take good care of your precious horses. I already told Marcus he's out, he's been too expensive for too long. Your staff will find out tomorrow. They'll hate me for it, but they're not the ones paying the bills, are they?" I leaned in close, brushed a non-existent hair from her forehead. "And that stallion of yours, Valkyrie? I've already got a buyer. They're wiring the down payment next week. Can you imagine that? Your champion bloodline, trotting around in some Texas tycoon's private zoo." I laughed softly. And that's when it happened. The heart monitor spiked, just a blip, just enough to break rhythm. A light flickered overhead. I stood up fast. Looked around. Nothing else moved. Her body was still. Coincidence, I told myself. Just coincidence. I walked out, a little too quickly. I didn't see her finger twitch. Or the tear trailing down her cheek. The next morning, the nurses found me in the hallway, hunched over a tablet, pretending to go over medical literature. "Mr. Langford," one of them said, her voice clipped but kind, "you should really get some rest." I nodded, weary-eyed, offering the same lie I'd rehearsed since the day of the accident. I just don't want her to be alone. That was the part everyone believed. Inside the ICU, Isabel lay exactly as I'd left her, unmoving, serene, and to the uninformed eye, hopeless. Her beauty hadn't faded, only changed, the lively sparkle in her eyes was gone, but her face still looked delicate, carved from marble and still too elegant to belong to this sterile place. I didn't sit this time. I stood. And I spoke softly but clearly, as if I wanted the machines to hear me too. "I met with the real estate agent this morning. She said with a little renovation, the Hamptons property could go for double what we thought. You'd be happy to know I'll put the money towards something meaningful, like a boat. Tasha and I are thinking of calling it Second Chance." Fitting, right? The oxygen machine hissed. The heart monitor beeped steadily. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a folded contract, and waved it in front of her face. That's Valkyrie's transfer. Signed, notarized, and ready for shipment. By this time next week, your little empire will belong to someone else. I'm not keeping the name, by the way. Isabel's field sounds like a cemetery. Just then, something buzzed unnaturally. The heart monitor stuttered, 3 short beeps. 1 long. The lights dimmed for half a second. I turned slowly. The nurse call light flicked on. Then off again. No one had touched it. A shiver crawled down my spine. I pressed the red button. I think there's a malfunction in ICU 2, I said when a nurse answered. The equipment's glitching. 10 minutes later, a tech came in, checked the machines, and muttered something about wiring. I stood aside, arms folded, pretending not to watch as he inspected every line. Nothing out of place. He shrugged. Just a hiccup. These things happen. But they didn't happen again. Not for the rest of the day. Only when I spoke. Only when I gloated. Later that night, after I had left, smug, satisfied, and already half drunk on the wine I poured in celebration, someone else entered the ward. He wasn't a doctor. Barely out of college, maybe. Just an orderly. Tall, lean, with tired eyes and calloused hands. He carried a small speaker tucked under one arm and a folded blanket under the other. He set the speaker on the side table and played a soft cello piece. Nothing dramatic, just calming, like a lullaby for a woman locked in silence. Then he leaned over and whispered, "Hey there, don't know if you can hear me, but if you can, I'm Jake. I'll be around most nights. You're not alone." And then, like a dream not yet born, Isabel's eyelid fluttered. Only once. But enough to make the heart monitor skip a beat. Jake froze. "Holy sh," he whispered, then stopped himself. He glanced at the screen, then back at her. The flutter didn't come again. But the air in the room felt different. Less like death. More like something holding on. Jake stayed a little longer, adjusting her blanket, tucking her hair back, and leaving the music on a quiet loop. He didn't know it yet. But he had just ignited a war between life and betrayal. The ICU ward at St. Augustine's was rarely quiet at night, but Isabel's room had become a pocket of strange calm. The nurses began calling it the still room. Patients came and went around her, monitors blinked and alarms cried, but her corner remained strangely untouched, like time was holding its breath. Jake noticed that too. He didn't say anything. Just kept showing up after his rounds. Bringing soft music, adjusting her bed, rubbing lotion on her hands so they wouldn't crack in the dry hospital air. One night, he even brought in a tiny fan and clipped it to the shelf so she wouldn't overheat. He treated her like a person, not a patient. "Hey, Isabel," he whispered during one of those quiet evenings. "I know I'm not supposed to talk this much in ICU, but I figure you won't rat me out." He laughed nervously and then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know, when I started this job, they told me not to get attached. But I don't know, something about you, it feels like you're here. Like you're just waiting for something. Or someone." Outside her room, the staff moved past, distracted and tired. The world was still spinning. Inside, something was changing. It was the 5th night of Jake's visits when the impossible happened. He was mid-sentence, talking about his old dog and the way her ears flopped when she ran, when Isabel's hand jerked. Not a spasm. Not a twitch. It rose, fingers curling slightly before falling back. Jake jumped up, nearly knocking over the stool. "Holy crap," he muttered, stumbling toward the monitor. The heartbeat was elevated, just slightly, but consistent. Normal. "Isabel?" he whispered, voice tight with disbelief. "Did you just move?" He pressed the nurse call button 3 times before someone finally arrived. Dr. Peters was paged. He rushed in, skeptical but curious. Jake stood back as machines were checked, vitals retaken, reflexes tested. A penlight flashed across her pupils, and one, just one, contracted ever so slightly. Jesus Christ, Peters whispered under his breath. She's tracking light reflex. It's faint, but it's there. Jake swallowed. So she's waking up? Maybe. Maybe not. Could be residual. Could be luck. Could be. He stopped, watching Isabel's lips twitch, the barest ghost of a frown surfacing. Could be a miracle, he said, softer now. Jake didn't sleep that night. He stayed by her side, scribbling in a small notebook he kept in his pocket. He wrote down the time of the movement, the music that had been playing, what he said just before. It was the beginning of something. He could feel it. When morning came, the doctor met with the staff. The prognosis remained guarded, but hopeful. They didn't call the husband. Not yet. Because Isabel hadn't said anything. Except her eyes, when they opened for just a breath of a second the next night. They held fear. Not confusion. Fear. When her eyes finally stayed open for more than 10 seconds, Isabel didn't ask where she was. She whispered, "Don't tell him." Dr. Peters blinked, crouched beside her with his stethoscope half raised. "Don't tell who?" Her breath was raspy, like it was dragging itself over broken glass just to get out. "My husband." Dr. Peters frowned. "You're conscious, Isabel. Do you understand what I'm saying?" She nodded. "Do you know who you are?" Another nod. He hesitated. "Your husband's been here almost every day." "Should I?" "No." Her voice was clearer this time. "Please. Don't tell him I'm awake." There was a tremble in her eyes, not from exhaustion, but something else. Something deeper. Something ancient and animal, pure survival. Dr. Peters stared at her for a long moment, then finally stood. He broke protocol. He didn't report her recovery. And Isabel Langford's secret stayed in ICU room 2. They moved her to a quieter section of the hospital. The official reason was monitoring in a lower stimulation environment. The real reason? They were hiding her. Only a few people knew the truth. Peters. One nurse. And Jake. Especially Jake. He visited during his break, just like before. Only now, she responded. Not fully, but enough. She blinked at him when he entered. Her fingers flexed when he brushed them with a warm cloth. And once, after he placed her favorite cello piece on the speaker, she whispered, "Thank you." Jake leaned in. "Can I ask you something?" She turned her head slightly, which for her was monumental. "Why don't you want your husband to know you're awake?" Her throat clicked before she answered. "Because he wants me dead." Jake froze. She closed her eyes. That accident wasn't an accident. The next time Dr. Peters came, Isabel asked for a pencil and paper. Her right hand still barely worked, but she used it like a lifeline. The handwriting was jagged, the letters uneven. But the message was clear. If he finds out I'm awake, he'll finish what he started. Dr. Peters didn't speak. He just looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, he saw not a patient, but a woman with a story. A past. A danger. He folded the note and slid it into his coat pocket. "I believe you." And just like that, Isabel Langford had an ally. That night, as Jake dimmed the lights and adjusted her blankets, she said something else. Something softer. "I used to love horses, you know." He smiled. "Yeah? Me too. My favorite was Valkyrie. I rescued him when I was 19. Everyone said he was too wild, too broken." Jake waited. "But he wasn't," she whispered. "He just needed someone to believe in him." Jake nodded. "You still have him?" She didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. And somewhere miles away, in a luxury barn nestled in the hills, Valkyrie screamed. It was raining the night the note arrived. A stable hand at Langford Ridge Stables found it tucked in the bottom of Valkyrie's feed bucket, folded twice, wrapped in a waterproof glove, written in handwriting he hadn't seen in weeks. Only one person wrote capital I's like that. Sharp and regal. Isabel. Marcus, the head groom, turned the letter over in his calloused hands. He had known Isabel Langford since she was 16. He had trained her first horse. Helped build her business. Watched her rise. Watched her marry that snake. Everyone at the stables had whispered about her husband behind her back. City guy. Slick talker. Doesn't know a saddle from a seatbelt. But Isabel had believed in him, for a while. And then, the accident. But this? This was no ghost story. Marcus lit the letter on fire after reading it and scattered the ashes under the old apple tree, just like she'd taught him. No evidence, the note had said. If you believe me, hide Valkyrie. Trust no one. The next morning, Valkyrie was gone. At the hospital, Jake kept his head down and passed another note from Isabel to Marcus through the courier who delivered pet therapy dogs. The courier had no idea what she carried. That was the point. Jake didn't trust the hospital anymore. The night before, he caught Isabel's husband, Elliot Langford, arguing with the chief administrator. Something about financial reevaluation and property titles. Jake had walked past them with a mop, unrecognizable in his orderly scrubs. But he heard enough. Once the estate is settled, Elliot said with fake sorrow, the horses will go. I already have buyers in mind. Even the stallion? Especially the stallion. Elliot and his business partner, Victor Marlowe, moved fast. By the end of the week, they had forged signatures, filed emergency probate claims, and listed Valkyrie in a secret auction. Victor was planning to sell him to the DeVoe family, Langford's fiercest competition in the racing world. A betrayal of Isabel's legacy. Her pride. Her bloodline. But the stallion never showed. The DeVoes waited. Furious. Suspicious. And Elliot? He exploded. He tore through the barn, screamed at staff, accused Marcus of theft. But there was no proof. No witness. No horse. Just dust and footprints and the growing smell of panic. The next night, Jake entered Isabel's room with cautious hope. They didn't find Valkyrie, he whispered. She smiled for the first time. Only a flicker. But it was there. And it terrified Elliot more than any ghost story ever could. Because somewhere, deep inside the woman he tried to silence, she was starting to fight back. The mask began to crack. Elliot Langford, always the picture of poise and control, had spent the last 2 weeks unraveling like an over-tightened watch spring. He'd fired 3 stable employees, threatened Marcus with legal action, and stormed into the hospital demanding access to Isabel's medical file. But Dr. Peters kept the ruse alive. She's showing small signs of involuntary motor response, he told Elliot, voice neutral. But nothing conscious. I'll alert you if anything changes. Elliot nodded, tight-lipped. But as he left the hospital, Peters noticed something odd. Elliot wasn't looking at Isabel's room. He was watching Jake. Jake was attacked 3 days later. It happened behind the hospital during his late break, just before midnight, in the quiet gravel lot behind the staff entrance. A man emerged from the shadows. No face. Just fists. One punch to the gut. Another to the ribs. You're too close, the attacker hissed. Stay away from her. Jake fell hard, shoulder slamming into the pavement. He saw the steel toe of a boot coming for his face. And then sirens. Someone had hit the emergency button from inside. Security guards rushed out. The attacker fled. But not before dropping something from his coat pocket. A business card. Victor Marlowe. At the precinct, it didn't take long for things to unravel. Jake filed a report. The hospital submitted security footage. And Marcus, watching from the sidelines, delivered the final blow. He handed over copies of veterinary records, horse transfer forms, and sale contracts, all forged in Elliot Langford's name. When confronted, Elliot cracked faster than expected. He was going to kill her, Jake said to the officer, eyes still bruised. He didn't think she'd ever wake up. But it wasn't until the interrogation room that the confession came. He knew she was waking up, the detective said, playing a recording. Her vitals were improving. The doctors had hope. Elliot leaned back in the metal chair, hands cuffed, voice calm as winter wind. I was going to poison her he said flatly. One more quiet push. That's all it would have taken. Silence. And the horses? A pause. They were a liability. So was she. They charged him with attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy to commit animal trafficking. Victor Marlowe was arrested at the airport trying to flee with a forged Canadian passport. And Isabel? She was still recovering. But she was awake. She watched the news report with Jake by her side, her hand finally able to wrap around a warm paper cup of tea. When they showed Elliot being escorted into a cruiser, she didn't cry. She just whispered, let him rot. The divorce was quiet. Isabel didn't want fanfare or courtroom drama. Just signatures. Boundaries. Freedom. Elliot fought at first, through a lawyer with slicked back hair and a weak chin. He claimed joint ownership of the estate, the stables, even her childhood home. Claimed he'd been invested emotionally and financially. But then the footage came out. The confession tape. The hospital logs. The poisoning plan. His attorney dropped him before the week was out. By the time the papers were finalized, Elliot had lost everything but his name, and even that was now stained beyond repair. Isabel left the city. She didn't return to the manor, or the estate, or the big cold house with black marble counters and ghosts in the hallways. She followed Marcus and Valkyrie to a quiet village in upstate New York where the air tasted like pine and rain and the stars came out without apology. Jake drove her there himself. They didn't talk much on the way. Just music. Windows down. Wheels humming like they knew the road by heart. When they arrived, Valkyrie was the first to greet her, nostrils flaring, stomping in recognition. He had grown wild again. Untamed. Glorious. Isabel reached out one trembling hand. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead to hers. Jake watched from a distance. And in that moment, Isabel wasn't the woman in a hospital bed anymore. She was home. They settled into a rhythm. Mornings in the pasture, evenings on the porch. Isabel began walking longer each day. Her speech strengthened. Her laugh returned in slow, surprising bursts. Jake stayed. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because this felt like the only place he'd ever wanted to be. They repaired fences, painted walls, planted herbs. Sometimes he cooked. Sometimes she did. Sometimes they burned it all and ordered takeout. They made space for something new. Something gentle. Back in the city, not everyone fared so well. Dr. Peters was forced out of the hospital. He'd broken protocol, violated administrative directives, and concealed a major medical update. The board stripped him of his research rights and claimed ownership of his latest neurorehabilitation model. They called it institutional property. He called it theft. After 17 years of service, he walked out with a box of files and a small plant. No one clapped. No one cared. Except one woman. Months passed. The leaves turned red, then gold. The wind carried the first hints of winter. And one morning, as mist curled through the trees and hooves stamped the earth in the distance, Isabel sat on the porch, sipping tea, when she saw a figure through the fog. A man. Carrying nothing. Wearing a long coat, worn at the edges. He looked tired. But free. It was Dr. Peters. She almost didn't recognize him at first. He'd lost the crispness that came with years of hospital lighting and clipboard authority. His hair had grown out, a little messy around the collar. His coat wasn't a lab coat anymore, it was wool, threadbare, and smelled faintly of campfire smoke. But his eyes? Still steady. Still kind. Isabel rose to her feet slowly, the ache in her hip reminding her how far she'd come. Dr. Peters, she said, almost laughing at the name, at how long ago it felt. He stopped in front of the porch. Smiled. Just Daniel now. Jake emerged from the barn a few seconds later, confused at first, but then recognizing him. You're the doctor. Daniel nodded. Was. Isabel stepped down the creaky stairs one at a time until she stood in front of him, inches away. You left, she said softly. They forced you out because of me. He shook his head. They forced me out because they don't know the difference between protocol and compassion. Jake watched silently, sensing something unspoken passing between them. You didn't have to come here, Isabel said. I know, Daniel replied. But I wanted to. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, thick with notes and sketches. I took what I could. Your case helped me prove something I believed for years. Consciousness doesn't just fade. It fights. You fought. She opened the envelope slowly, flipping through diagrams, research logs, charts filled with her own vitals during the days Jake played music or whispered stories. You saved yourself, Daniel said. We just gave you something to hold on to. That evening, they sat together on the porch. The three of them. No hospital walls. No monitors. Just the sound of wind through the trees and Valkyrie grazing quietly nearby. Daniel talked about leaving medicine. About plans for a nonprofit focused on patient advocacy and recovery care. Jake mentioned possibly opening a rehabilitation stable, where people and animals could heal together. Isabel listened. And for the first time in a long time, she felt not alone. Not observed. Not monitored. Seen. The next morning, she brought them both into the old tack room behind the barn. Dusty, forgotten, filled with artifacts from a life she once lived. In the corner sat a wooden trunk. Hand-carved. Locked. She opened it with a key that had never left her neck, even in a coma. Inside were documents. Deeds. Photographs. Letters. And a wedding ring. She picked it up, looked at it one last time, and set it down beside the trunk. Then she turned around. And smiled. The ring stayed in the trunk. She didn't bury it. Didn't throw it in a river or shatter it with a hammer like some dramatic revenge tale. Isabel simply left it there, quiet and unceremonious, the way you set down a story you've finally finished reading. The next morning, she took a walk through the forest trail behind the property. Alone. It had been almost a year since the fall that nearly took everything. She ran her fingers along the trees as she passed, feeling their rough, honest bark. The air smelled of pine needles and soil, not antiseptic. Her muscles ached, her gait still imperfect, but each step was hers. Every inch of forward motion was earned. At the edge of the trail, she stopped. There, tucked under the wild canopy, stood the old hunter's chapel, abandoned and overgrown. Vines crept across the wood like memories. She stared at it for a long time. And then she smiled. It started with clearing brush. Jake borrowed a chainsaw. Daniel bought paint. Isabel made lists, supplies, flowers, wood polish, music. Local vendors offered discounts when they heard what the chapel was being used for. Word traveled through the village. A wedding. No pageantry. No press. Just a woman who survived. A man who stayed. And another who returned when no one else did. Some called it strange. Others called it poetic. but everyone called it deserved. The night before the ceremony, Isabel stood in front of a mirror in her simple lace dress. No diamonds. No veil. Just a pair of riding boots under the hem, and a small braid in her hair threaded with a piece of Valkyrie's mane. Jake knocked on the door. "You decent?" She turned. Terrifyingly. He stepped in, holding a small box. Inside was a necklace, a silver charm shaped like a stirrup, engraved with 3 letters. I.J.D. Triple Trouble, he joked. Isabel took it with trembling fingers, but before she could speak, he said, "You don't have to choose. Not today. Not ever. We're here because we chose you." She kissed his cheek, and that was answer enough. At sunrise, under a canopy of dewlit branches and soft cello music echoing through the chapel, Isabel Langford walked down the aisle, alone. No one gave her away. Because she had already given herself back. Daniel stood at the front. Jake beside him. And in that space where a single groom would have waited, 2 men stepped aside, linked arms with her, and walked together into the light. They didn't sign a certificate that day. They signed a vow. To build something new. Together. Whatever it looked like. Outside, Valkyrie stood in the field, watching with wild eyes. He lifted his head, snorted once, and stamped the earth like he understood something no one else did. This wasn't the end. It was just the first stride of the next race. The wedding wasn't covered by the media. No magazines, no cameras, no trending hashtags. But every guest who stood beneath the canopy of that forest chapel that morning knew they were witnessing something sacred. Not just a union, but a resurrection. By noon, the reception had spilled out onto the open field near the stables. There were no crystal chandeliers or tuxedoed servers. Just picnic tables covered in fresh linens, wildflower arrangements in mason jars, and hand-labeled bottles of cider from the local orchard. Children ran barefoot through the grass. Adults laughed like they hadn't in years. Horses grazed in the distance, their presence calm and symbolic. And in the center of it all, Isabel stood barefoot on the earth, dancing. Marcus gave a toast that made half the room cry and the other half cheer. Even Valkyrie seemed to nod in approval when his name came up. "I once said Valkyrie couldn't be tamed," Marcus said. Turns out he wasn't wild. He was waiting. Just like Isabel. Waiting for the storm to pass. And when it finally did, she rose like the dawn. Jake raised his glass. Daniel did too. Isabel wiped away a tear and whispered, "Thank you for not letting me disappear." That evening, as dusk curled around the property and laughter turned to quiet conversation, Isabel slipped away. Down the hill. Past the stables. Toward the trail where her life had nearly ended. She wasn't running from it anymore. At the clearing near the bend, she found an old bench, half-rotted but still standing. She sat. The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves. She closed her eyes. Not to escape. But to feel. And in that stillness, she realized something. She hadn't just survived. She had come back to herself. Her instincts. Her voice. Her fight. A soft crunch of gravel behind her. Jake approached from one side. Daniel from the other. No words. They sat beside her in silence. 3 people who'd been broken, burned, betrayed, and rebuilt something from the ash. Not romance, not rescue. Resilience. Months passed. The village began calling the chapel, the Langford Chapel. The stables rebranded as Valkyrie Haven, a place where rescued horses and recovering humans could heal together. Daniel's advocacy nonprofit found a home office on the 2nd floor. Jake ran day programs. Isabel handled the books and wrote again, slowly, carefully, but fiercely. No more whispers behind her back. No more men deciding what she could become. Only space. And sun. And breath. And sometimes, when the mist rolls in just before sunrise, the villagers say they see her on horseback, galloping full speed across the hill. Boots in the stirrups. Hair flying wild. Not a survivor. Not a victim. Just a woman. Riding free.